Welcome back, friends. In this architectural photography editing video, we're going to be turning this photograph into this using nothing more than Lightroom. How to edit architecture for beginners. That's the approach I'm going to take with this one. I'm going to go through everything in Lightroom. I'm going to try and explain it really thoroughly so that it's really accessible even if you're just getting started with photo editing of architecture. So let's get into it and see what we can do. So just before pressing record, I smashed out this edit on this photograph. It originally looked like this. So this is what we're going to be working on. It ends up looking like this, so this gives you a rough idea of where we're headed. So first of all, let's take a look at this photograph here. I'm going to expand my tools over on the right hand side, and so we're not looking at everything all at once. What I'm going to do is just right click on this bar here, and I'm going to move to solo mode. So that means that I'm only seeing one tool at a time. When I click on a different one, the other one closes down, and that's a nice, neat way to work. This was my base exposure photo that I took here, and I'm leaving up my information here so you can see this was a 2.5 second exposure at f8, which was an appropriate depth of field, and that's pretty good for most architectural photography. Pretty much everything I shoot is either f8 or f11. I'm usually shooting at an ISO around 64, which is my lowest in my camera. So why have I gone for 200 in this instance? Well, if I want to get the same exposure at this time of night, if I was at say ISO 100, that would mean I would need to shoot this as a 5 second exposure. And if I'm shooting a bracketed set, by the time you get up to the longer exposure, this one being 10 second, if I'm at ISO 100, I'm now shooting at 20 seconds. And so by the time you've taken your bracketed set of 5 photos, so if I click on the first one, hold down Shift and click on the last, and now I press N on my keyboard, that's going to bring up all 5 photographs. This probably took 30 seconds to capture these, whereas if I was at ISO 100, it would have taken twice as long. And when you're working with the sun setting and you're losing light, you want to try and work as quickly as possible, because the longer it takes, the more limited you're going to be to actually be able to capture all these different images. And so that window of opportunity to get these shots is short. Now I'm just going to give us a bit more screen real estate, so I'm pressing Shift and F on the keyboard, and that's just going to cycle through my different screen modes. So you saw originally I was like this, press Shift F again, we go to another mode, Shift F again. Now we've lost all of that information at the top. It's still there if we hover our mouse over it, but it's just a better way to work. We can also press T on the keyboard, and that's going to get rid of this toolbar here. I don't need to see that at the moment. All I need are my develop tools, and so I'm just going to switch over to the develop mode, close that down, or minimize it, sorry, and now we can get to editing this photo. Now what I showed you here was taken off a single frame. However, for a higher quality, what I prefer to do is actually combine all of my 5 photos into one, and we can do that with the merge to HDR function. So I'm just going to shift click on the last one, so that selects all of those in that series. I'm going to right click, and now we have from this context menu here, what we can do is come down to photo merge, and we're going to choose HDR. You can see you can also press Ctrl H. I photographed this with a really sturdy tripod, so there really shouldn't be much in the way of movement. However, we can turn on auto align just in case, you know, I may have trod on one of these wooden beams during that sort of 30-second period that these photos were taken. So it's best just to turn that on just to be on the safe side. I'm going to turn off auto settings, and now the photo looks awful, but I really don't care because I want to be in control of bringing back all of that detail. And in terms of deghosting, i.e. things that are moving in my frame, I don't remember there being any wind, so there shouldn't be much movement in the leaves. The pool was very still. However, if we just leave a low amount on just in case there are any movements, happy with that, I'm just going to click merge. And now Lightroom goes about creating a new 32-bit file for us that contains all of that dynamic range, i.e. all of the information from the very darkest shadows all the way to the very brightest highlights, and it's combining it beautifully into one photo. I say beautifully, but it's not actually doing any processing for us. It currently looks flat, underexposed, and doesn't appear any different from the original single frame that we put into it. And why is that? Well, we haven't done any processing yet. It's just a case of we are safe in the knowledge that all that information exists in the file for us to pull out from it. So when we start brightening things up or darkening them, we've got a much richer data set to work with, which basically means we're going to have a cleaner, nicer file to present to our client. Incidentally, Lightroom's merge to HDR feature is very different from a lot of dedicated HDR software, and that is because most of the dedicated HDR software is actually performing a process called tone mapping, which is actually bringing the best of the shadows, the highlights, and actually creating that as our finished image. Whereas in Lightroom, it's not doing any of that. All it's doing is just combining all of the information into one file, and then it's up to us as the photo editor to bring back all of that data. And that can be seen as a pro or a con. In our case, we'll take it as a pro, and we'll see how we can bring all of that data back using Lightroom. Let's press on. So now in our film strip down here, we have the number 6. That is indicating that this is part of a stack. So this is our HDR version, and you can see that here in the file name. It's appended with hdr.dng, so it's still a digital negative file, i.e. a raw file, which is perfect. But if I expand that, you'll see that it's now sitting on top of the stack of the original 5 differently exposed photos. And to be honest, like I say, if we flick between the HDR version and the base exposure of the single frame, there really isn't much difference at all. But just out of demonstration purposes, I am going to boost the exposure on this really heavily. Let's go up to +5 so things are really overexposed. And now let's zoom in here to the wood. We'll jump into the single frame, which pretty much looked identical, and let's do the same. Let's put the exposure up to +5, and this may be hard to see on your screen, so I'm just going to open up my navigator view here by clicking on that left hand side. That opens up this whole panel here, and now I'm going to zoom into a 400% view just so we can look in this area of shadow here. So this is our original single frame, and this is our HDR version. As you can see right in this corner here, the file is much cleaner, even though we've boosted those shadows massively. So that is why I like to use an HDR version of the file, because it's much cleaner in those shadows and in those highlights as well. If I bring that exposure down, you can see that we're not overexposed anywhere. We've got all of that detail in the highlights there. It's always nice to work in an uncluttered view, so I'm just going to get rid of that panel on the left hand side and click on the arrow there to get rid of the film strip. And if we want to get rid of the photo information in the top left, what we can do is press Ctrl+J. That gives us access to our view options, and all we need to do is just uncheck that box, Show Info Overlay, and now that's gone. Now all we see is the photo and our editing tools. So let's get into the editing. First of all, we want to apply the correct profile. Adobe Color is an okay profile, but it's not particularly accurate. So what we want to do is apply a camera matching profile. Now watch what happens when I apply camera standard. All of a sudden the colors have shifted, but not much else has changed. And that is because any camera matching profile is going to give you more accurate colors because it's designed by your manufacturer to match with your camera. Makes sense, right? Whereas the Adobe Color one, it's more of a generic profile. However, I say you want to stay away from just a standard profile, and you want to try and get your image as flat as possible to start with for the editing process. And so if we move to camera neutral, you're going to see that all of a sudden we just get a little bit more detail in those highlights and the shadows. But we can take things even further by going for a camera flat profile. Now, not all camera manufacturers provide a flat profile, so what you want to do is just go for the flattest profile you can possibly see. So if I jump to the camera standard and you look at the actual histogram itself, if you're unable to see it in the actual image, watch the histogram. You can see that now our data is split between the left hand side and the right hand side. Not much on the right because it's such an underexposed image, but it's a high contrast image and you can tell that. And now if I choose camera flat, watch the histogram in the top right, camera flat, all of a sudden all that info that was bunched down on the left hand side, that's all moved up. And that's the idea here. We just want to get all of this distribution of the tonal range, i.e. the shadows and the highlights. We want all of that information to sit more in this area in the histogram. We don't want it all the way on the left or all the way on the right. And that normally happens when you have a high contrast image. As you can see, when I boost the contrast up, it moves that all the way to the left. We don't want that. But what we do want is a correctly exposed photo. So let's grab the exposure and just start bringing that up. And as you can see, as soon as we brighten this up, it still holds all that information because we've got a lovely high dynamic range file, that HDR file. And now this is looking pretty good. So we're at +2 at the moment. But another major thing that is not right at the moment is the white balance. This is as shot as is in my camera, and normally I'll just leave the camera to figure out the white balance while I'm on site. I won't try and overthink things like white balance, because it's so easy to change and correct when you're in post-production. So we can get our color picker here, which is going to allow us just to select somewhere in the scene that we feel should be pure white. So if I click on the side of the building there, all of a sudden we've got a completely different color palette because of that change in white balance or color temperature. But I'm still not happy with that. Another way you can do things, instead of just going for as shot and then moving this around or using the color picker, you could just come through and see, okay, what does Lightroom think it should be? If I go to auto, yeah, that looks much better already. However, I'm very rarely satisfied with just a default like auto or daylight or whatever you want here, but it's worth just clicking them just to kind of see where things are sat, see what it looks like, see what you're happy with, and then you can gauge the number and think, okay, well, in that auto, yeah, 4600, that wasn't too bad, but it's still a little on the warm side, so we can just cool that off. And then with the tint, you know, things were looking a little greeny, so I can just bring that up to the right and just add a little more magenta just to balance that out. And if at any point we want to see where we came from and where we've got to, we can press the / key on the keyboard. So here's our before, here is our after. Already that is a massive change, and we've only literally done 3 things. We've changed the profile, we've corrected the white balance, and we've boosted the exposure. I'm going to be tackling this image in 2 stages. The first pass is just a generic global edit where I want to get the photo looking pretty good overall. And then from there, the second pass, this is where you can really kind of finesse your work and elevate your work above the competition. And that is by zoning in, using masking to selectively change certain areas of our photo. So we will get to that, but this first part is all about making the photo look pretty good overall. So let's get into that now, but do remember, if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And you never know, if it's a particularly complex thing you're asking, I might make a video dedicated to that. But let's get back into Lightroom. Okay, in spite of the fact that we have very bright highlights over here, the overall photo is starting to look like it's lacking contrast. So you might think, okay, to fix that, let's just grab the contrast slider and boost that up. Now, yeah, it looks a lot more punchy right now, but that's not actually the direction I like to take things, because as soon as we do that, we're sort of pushing the 2 ends of the histogram again towards the very dark, towards the very bright, and it's hard to work with that. I like to take a more controlled approach where we actually introduce the contrast ourselves. So I'm going to double click that to reset it. So that's what you do if you want to reset something quickly, just double click on that little slider icon. And this time, rather than going into the positive contrast territory, I'm actually going to reduce the contrast even more. And as I drop this into the negative territory, you can actually see, if you look at the histogram, that the tonal range just starts to bunch in the middle of the histogram here. And that's kind of what I want, contrary to what you might think. So -50 is pretty good. Let's see what we can do from here. We're going to grab the highlights and just start to bring those down a little bit, and straight away you can see all of that detail starting to come back in the house. I don't like to push things too far, because when you go too far bringing back the highlights, that's when things start to look a little bit fake and a little bit like that kind of ugly HDR look you get. So I don't want to go too far. I just want to go far enough that we're starting to recover those highlight details. It's looking pretty good up in the bedroom. Things are a little bit blown out still through here, but I'm not concerned at this point, because if you remember, I said I'm going to address this in 2 passes. This is not the pass where I'm going to get too concerned about individual little details like the highlights through these windows here. We will address it though. Okay, the next stage is the shadows. We want to make sure that we've got detail in those shadows. And again, I'm going to push this all the way to 100 just temporarily, just so I can see what's going on. Now, again, you might think, well, dropping the shadows, that looks much better because it's bringing back contrast. Again, I'm not worried about contrast just yet. I just want to make sure that we've got a full tonal range, full amount of information in the file. So I'll just boost those up a little bit. Now I can tell just by looking at the photo that we're already peaking to pure white in these lights here, but I'm not too concerned about that at this point. But I may just boost that up, because as I do, I'll go over the top with this just so you can see it adds more contrast, it adds more saturation. And at this point, because the histogram is looking very left hand heavy, you know, most of our information exists on the left hand side of the center, I'm not too worried about bringing this point up, because I will control those highlights afterwards. But at the moment you can see the histogram just starts to creep up on this right hand side here, and that's kind of what I want. I'm pretty happy with that. If we turn our highlight clipping warning on by just clicking this little triangular icon here, now you see all these little red patches. That's basically showing us this is where we've bleached out to pure white. And if I double click to reset that, it's not actually adding in too much more in the way of completely blown out areas by boosting this up. So I'm actually going to bring this up just so that we're expanding our tonal range through here, and it's really not to the detriment of the overall photo. So that's what I'm going to do there, and conversely I'm going to do the opposite with the blacks, because at the moment we have no pure black point. So I can turn this little triangle on here, and let's push this all the way to -100. Now you can see all of this blue area. That's saying this is a pure black pixel. It has no data in it whatsoever. So I'm just going to bring that up until we're only just hitting those black points. Somewhere around -18 is pretty good. If we've got a few black pixels in areas that are really insignificant, like in the reeds over here or between the boards, I'm really not concerned about that at all. And now our tonal range is actually looking really good. So I'm going to turn off these little warning triangles here. Okay, let's do a quick before and after. Okay, we're headed in the right direction. We're now moving into the present section where we've got the texture slider, we've got the clarity slider, and we've got the dehaze slider, all of which can be really helpful for editing architectural photography. If I had to put them in order of preference, I like the clarity slider, followed by dehaze, and least of all the texture. And based on that, that kind of indicates the strength with which I apply them. I'll normally be more heavy-handed with my clarity. I'll add a bit of dehaze and hardly any of the texture. The clarity slider is one that you need to be really careful with when you're editing humans, people, portraits. However, for architecture, the buildings can handle a much more aggressive dousing of clarity. So look, like at +100, that's far too much. But normally for people, if you were kind of putting in around 28 clarity, that'd be way too much. But for architecture, it holds up nicely. Dehaze can be quite useful, and as you can see, if I push that to 100, it's really oversaturating things and it blocks out the blacks pretty quickly. So I don't like to go too heavy-handed with that. It's all personal preference when you come down to these ones, but I don't know, somewhere around that sort of 20 mark, +16, that's fine. I'll normally pop in just a little bit of vibrance and saturation into my work, and then if certain areas are getting oversaturated, such as the oranges in the wood at the back here, I can always come in and selectively desaturate them and tone them down. Okay, let's have a look at the progress we've made already. Here we go. Here's our before, here's our after. You can see just by moving some of these sliders around, following some basic principles, it's actually really easy. You really don't need to be intimidated by Lightroom. You don't need to be intimidated by shooting high-end architecture or anything like that. The process and techniques are all the same. Okay, let's keep going. All we've done so far is editing through the basic panel. That's it. Now if we want to add more contrast to our image, now it's looking pretty good as a foundation, this is when we jump into the tone curve and we can add a trusty S curve. So that is literally just pulling down on the left hand side of the curve, and as you guys know, the left hand side is representing the shadows, and when we pull down we darken, when we push up we brighten. So by pulling down on the left hand side, we're going to be darkening those shadows. We don't want to go too far. And then on the right hand side, this is talking into the highlights, the bright part of the image. So if I push that up, we're brightening those highlights. If I bring it down, we're darkening the highlights. So what we want to do is just put a subtle S into this curve. If we double click these, it's just going to take them away. So let's go from the beginning. Basically, we have a 45-degree angle running through this. And when we bring our curve below this 45-degree angle, any point in our image that falls below that line is going to get darker. If we were to raise it up, any point above this line gets brighter. And so what we can do is just bring those shadows down on the left hand side. So currently everything's getting darker because you put a point down here and pull it down, it's also going to bring the highlights a little bit, and that is why we add a secondary point up here, and now we bring that point above the line. And so effectively we've added contrast. Let's have a look. Here's our before, here's our after. So we've reintroduced a lovely amount of contrast, but we've done so in a much more controlled way, where we've still got detail right through all of the shadows in the very darkest area that was through here originally. You saw that. And also in the highlights, admittedly, we're getting a little bit blown out here, but I will deal to that. But basically, we do have detail right through the image, and we have contrast as well. Whereas initially, when I applied those camera matching profiles that were a lot more contrasty, like camera standard, we had the contrast, but at the sacrifice of all of those details. And that's why I recommend doing it the way that I've shown you here. Okay, if we just work in a top-down approach, after the tone curve, we would normally come into the color section where we have the hue, saturation, and luminance. And so the hue allows us to dial into specific colors and actually change that color. And that can be really useful for getting rid of color casts in architecture, but I'm going to reset that. Saturation allows us to control the intensity, how strong that color is. So for example, if we wanted to make the sky a richer blue and the water a richer blue, we can absolutely do that as well. And this is a really great approach. Luminance you can use to brighten things up, or let's say we wanted to just darken down those oranges and the yellow area. You can do that through this section here as well. So as good as that approach is, that is the way that I used to control color when I'm doing my architectural photography edits. I prefer now to be more specific, even more specific than that, by using Lightroom's masks. So while using those sliders is a simpler approach, and I did say that this was going to be accessible for beginners, but hopefully by me explaining the techniques of using the masks, you're still going to get value from that and be able to use those masks, because it is a much better way to edit your photos because it gives you more control. And as you would have seen from that initial section where we went through all the tools, the basic sliders, you hopefully realized that it's about having control over your image, not just kind of slapping on contrast and going, contrast, good. So you want to be the one in the driving seat of your edit, not Lightroom. So for now, we're just going to park the HSL section. A lot of driving analogies going on here. So before I drop any more, we'll just carry on with the edit. The color grading section lets us push colors into the highlights, the shadows, and the midtones. But to be honest, it's a very creative tool. I don't find it that appropriate for editing architecture. My clients like to see reality more as it was, so I leave that alone. Again, let's have a look at our before and our after before we jump into the detail section. So let's zoom all the way in here. We're currently at 400%, so I'm just going to come over to my navigator. We're going to move to 100% just so it's a little bit of a more fair representation of how sharp this is or isn't. And it's relatively sharp, not too bad. I normally find that for my lens, I like to push things quite high, and I also go for a radius of around 1.5. That normally works quite well in terms of sharpening, but usually it will introduce just a little bit of unwanted noise. And so what we can do is just grab the noise reduction slider and push that up. By the very nature of the noise reduction tool, you'll find that when you push that up, things just start to get a little bit soft around the edges. It's not just the flat plane surfaces that get smoothed out, also your edges can get a little softer as well. And so I don't like to take that too high, but if you do find your edges are just getting a little soft again, what we can do is revisit the sharpening. So if you're not sure exactly what's going on with your sharpening, a good little tip is to hold down the Alt key or Option on the Mac, and when you start to slide this, you're going to actually see in black and white the sharpening. You can do the same for the radius by holding the Alt key, and now you can actually see just how strong that sharpening effect is by holding that down. So I really don't like to take that too high, but I do find that 1.5, like I say, does work quite well for my lens. Because of the sharpness of individual lenses, each lens requires a different amount of sharpening to optimize it, and the same goes for sensors as well. Whether you're shooting on a full frame or a crop, you're going to find that these settings are different for you. So you just need to experiment to see what you like. So what you can do is just toggle those details off and then toggle them on to see what you've done. So here's our before, here's our after. Probably a lot easier to see when I do zoom in. Let's go for a 200% zoom, and now let's turn this off and turn it on. Already looking much better. Now, one thing that I haven't done yet is the lens corrections, and to be honest, I usually do this first, so I'm not really sure why I haven't done this yet, so my apologies. What I'm going to show you here, I would recommend you do at the front end of your editing. I was just trying to work through top to bottom, but normally I will have these lens corrections applied when I actually import the photo, all as part of my editing system so that things run so much quicker. So we want to make sure that we click the remove chromatic aberration box. So if I turn this off, you may notice a little bit of fringing around here. It's normally evident just around the edges. It's not too bad on my camera, but you'll normally see more around the edges of your frame. So in the tree here, you can see a purple fringe on the left hand side and then more of a greeny cyan on the right. But hopefully by clicking the remove chromatic aberration box, just like that, it is gone. So that is definitely something I'd recommend turning on for architectural photography. We also want to enable the profile correction, and I'm going to zoom out while I do this. So let's turn that on and see what it does. And as I turned that on, you would have seen a change in the geometry of the photo. So this was before, this was after. And as I flick between the two and go back to the original, you can see that this kind of has a bit of a bulbous, almost barrel-like look when compared to this correction. Very few lenses, if any, are optically perfect. So this tool allows Lightroom to pull from your camera's metadata information about the lens, and in its database it has the algorithms to correct for any barrel distortion, pin cushioning, things like that, even the vignetting around the edges, and so it will actually correct for those, and normally it does a very good job. So I always make sure I have that turned on, and you probably should too. So you can see here in the lens profile that Lightroom has correctly identified the lens that I'm using and has applied the right profile. But if for some reason you find that it's not quite perfect, you can actually come in and make adjustments. So if I was to take these sliders all the way back down to 0, this is how it was originally. And by bringing it all the way up to 100, that is applying the full amount of that particular correction. So you could say, I want to correct for the distortion, but not the vignetting. I actually like the darkening around the edge. So if I double click to reset that to 100, yeah, okay, it's brightening all the edges. So you get a much more uniform brightness in your photo, which is a more accurate representation of the scene. However, I actually quite like a little bit of vignetting around the edges. I don't mind it. So you may actually decide, you know what, I don't want to go fully removing the vignetting. I don't want to leave it at 0. I might just split the difference and leave that around 50. That's entirely up to you. But if we toggle this before and after, we can see that that lens correction is certainly helping us. And the closer you get to shooting at your lens's widest angle, for my case that would be 16mm, the more this lens correction comes in to save the day. And the next thing is transform, and this is massive as well. An absolute giveaway for an amateur architectural photographer is when they present work and the sides of the building aren't nice and straight, nice and true. The architect wants to see perfectly straight lines. So when you're on site, obviously you want to make sure that you're doing everything to make sure your camera is leveled. But if you're tilting your camera up or down, you are going to get some keystoning, some convergence of those lines. And if you're not using a tilt shift lens, don't worry, we can correct it in Lightroom. So as long as you're not going to the extreme with your tilts, which you really don't want to be with your framing anyway, even if there's, a significant amount of convergence, we can fix that. This particular example doesn't need too much correction, but you'll get the idea. So let's have a look. So the most simple approach would just be to click auto and hope that Lightroom does a good job. And here we can see that's Lightroom's best guess, and it's not too bad. The way that I like to check my verticals isn't by doing anything in the center of the frame. I go to the very extremes, right at the edge of the frame, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of any anomalies. And so if I zoom in here, we can see that the wood here is a little bit off kilter, but that could be because it's reflected and the glass may not be true. So what we need to do is find the nearest thing to the edge that should be straight and true. So this line here, that should be straight. And so if we just move it over here, we don't even need to put guides on. We can actually look at the side of our palette here and use that as a guide. And you can see it's done a pretty good job. It's not too bad. We can do the same over the other side as well and just see how that's looking just in the window frame here. Okay, yeah, not too bad at all. So I'm happy with that. But to be honest, oftentimes Lightroom's auto doesn't do the best job. And if that is the case, what we can do is come over to the guided tool here. And that way we can actually just come in. We can click on the side of an edge there and just drag down and then release further down, and that's going to set one vertical line. And then we want to do the same over on the left hand side here. We could use the window frame again. I can click, and now we should have an image where the uprights are lovely and true. And I much prefer doing it with the guided method because again, we are in control and now we know that it is correct. An alternative method is to actually grab the transform sliders and actually tilt those, but to be honest, I'm not a big fan of this method. This is the way I used to use prior to Lightroom releasing this guided method, but I would strongly recommend that you get used to using this guided method. If you also need a horizontal line in your image, you can also drag one of those as well. So let's suppose that the horizon line came somewhere over here, and then when we release that, it also corrects for the horizontal aspect as well. But I'm not too worried about that, so I'm just going to press my delete key on that and that is gone. So I don't want to see these guides anymore, so I'm just going to click on that tool and that's going to hide those for me. I'm going to close down the transform tool, and now is a good opportunity, now that we've applied all of our changes, our global changes, we can see our before and after. So I'm going to press the / key to see our before and then release it to see our after. Here's our before, here's our after. Big improvement. The photo looks way better, but we can also do better. So this is where the real power comes from, because we're going to be able to mask in specific areas and control those, whether it's we want to change the color, the brightness, the luminosity of that area, whatever it is, we're going to have direct control over that with Lightroom's masks. So I'm going to go through a few examples and just see if we can't just polish this photo up so that when we send it back to the client, they're going to be delighted, we're going to get well paid, and we're going to be invited back for the next shoot as well. By the way, in the past when I've shared techniques like this, there'll always be someone who will pop up in the comments going, well, that's all very well and good, but it takes too long. I can't do that for my real estate photography. And absolutely, real estate, this might be over the top for that. I'm talking about doing work for architects, builders, high-end work where they are paying you for a high quality result. But here's the other thing. What I'm showing you here, the length of this video, that isn't how long it actually takes me to edit these photos. And you'll see that when you understand, internalize these techniques and start to use them yourself, you can smash through edits like this in literally like 5 minutes. But the time that you do spend is well worth it for the result. So let's move on and I'll show you the masking techniques. Okay, I'm going to come up to this icon here, and this is our masking option. So when we click that, we have the option to add any of these masks here. And so I'm going to keep things nice and simple to start with, and we're going to add a radial gradient, i.e. a round or oval gradient. So I click and I drag out, and currently we kind of see this ready overlay, and all that's doing is just showing us where this mask is going to affect. And so in the center here I have 100% of whatever effect I'm going to apply, and then it's going to taper off from between this central oval to the oval on the outside. So you can see that that red just sort of dissipates towards the edge here. So what might we want to do with a mask like this? Well, I'm thinking that we actually brighten up this area here, because currently if I move this away, the pool's looking a little bit dark. So let's just brighten up this area and help to draw our viewer's eye into the center of the frame. So let's go extreme so you can see exactly what's going on. We've added an exposure bump of +4, and I can move that anywhere around the photo, but I'm thinking like centralized and just lower into the pool here, but obviously nowhere near that much. Let's boost that by about 1.2, happy with that. But as we boost the exposure, those highlights are just going to get even more blown out. So what we can do is counteract the exposure boost by grabbing the highlights and just making sure that we are controlling those. Okay, next let's add a gradient to the sky so that we're darkening down the top, and again helping to bring our viewer's eye into the center of the frame and the architecture itself. Anywhere that's brighter, the viewer's eye goes there first, and conversely, darker areas, the viewer tends not to look. So if we add a darkening gradient from the top of the sky down towards the building, it's really going to help. So again, in the masking section, we've now got this floating palette which we can expand here, and that's probably a better view because we see a little bit more about the masks. And if we click the plus icon here, create new mask, we again have an option to select any one of these masks. And so for this example, we could select sky, which is brilliant because it's going to use Lightroom's AI to actually detect where the sky is, and it's excellent for doing that. However, it's not going to allow me to add a tapered gradient. So what I'm going to do is actually use the gradient, and then we're going to combine it with the sky selection so that we're getting the best of both worlds in terms of darkening down, but it won't affect the building. Let me show you how we do that. I'm going to click on that gradient, and I'm going to drop the exposure down, and currently we don't see anything because I haven't drawn where my mask will be. So all I need to do is say I want to start it up the top and taper it down here. So I'm going to click once and start pulling down. So now above the top line you can see that we're going to have an exposure drop of -1.43, which is the value I've put in, and that's just going to taper off from 50% at that central line there to 0 down here. And if I come over to the mask palette again, we have a little eye icon here, and if I click and hold that, we can see our before, and when I release we see our after. So I'm pretty happy with that. However, you can see that it's just influencing the building here. We're darkening down the building as well, and I don't want that. And this is where masks can get a little bit complicated, but if you don't understand this, just re-watch this section of the video because I'm hoping it's going to make sense to you. So the idea is this: we've got our gradient that we've applied top down, it's going over the building. I only want to apply that gradient to the sky. So what I need to do is intersect what I've created, the gradient, with the sky. So all I need to do is give Lightroom those two pieces of information. The first one being the gradient that goes over the whole photo, and then the second piece of information saying intersect that only with the sky. So that's what I'm going to do now, so pay attention. I'm sorry, that sounded a bit bossy, didn't it? I didn't mean it to. Okay, we'll come up to our mask here and we want to click these 3 ellipses, the 3 dots here. And that's going to give us the option to intersect the mask with, and now we can choose. So I'm just going to say select sky. You can see down here that Lightroom is calculating. One moment please. And what it should do is now keep that gradient that we created, but we should only see it in the sky. And you can see a representation of that just here, but if I hover, you can see now from that red that it no longer goes over the top of the building. Perfect! When you start to get to grips with how masks work and how they can interact with other masks, it really opens up an infinite world of possibilities for your editing. So much control, it's fantastic. So next we're going to take a look at whether we can actually control the brightness level that we see through the windows and just drop that down a little bit. And we're going to use a different mask, so let's take a look at that. Okay, we've got options here. There are a few ways that we could tackle the brightness in the windows here. We could either say, hey look, most of the color that exists there is very yellowy, and so we could say we want a mask that just talks into the yellows. We also know that it's very bright, so we could equally select a mask that says, hey, just talk into the brightest parts of the photo. And so I think that's what we're going to do here. We're going to go create new mask, and this time we want to come down to luminance range. So luminance being just a fancy word for brightness. So we're going to click that. And now what we need to do is use this little brightness picker here just to drag a section over the brightest pixels. And now from the red overlay you can see exactly what we've selected, and if I grab the exposure slider and let's say we start bringing that down, you can see that we are affecting just those areas. I'm not really wanting to drop the exposure as much as I am just control the highlights, so I'm just going to bring that down. And those internal lights are currently very orangey and very yellow, and that may be the look that you're going for. Or if you want to actually dull that down, we could reduce the temperature in those lights, and that's just going to help to neutralize the interior as well. If we feel like down here things are getting a little bit green, we could just boost the tint up and push a little more magenta into that. So that's one option for actually changing the color, but we can also come down to the saturation slider and say, hey, we just don't want that color to be as intense, and just start to bring that saturation down. If I press the O on the keyboard again, we can see that the mask we created isn't actually that precise, and we've got quite a bit of spill over into other areas, even such as the sky up here. So there's a couple of ways that we can address that. We can either come into the actual range sliders here and actually adjust these, and we can tighten them up or bring them wider. Or what we can do is the same as what we did last time, which was to say intersect this mask with another mask. So currently we've selected based on the brightness values. We've said select the very bright pixels in the image, but we also know that the light inside the building is very yellow. So what we could do is say intersect with the yellow as well. And that way it's going to stop it interacting with the sky, which doesn't have any yellow in it. So we're going to do the same thing we did before, click those 3 dots, and come down to intersect mask with, and this time we're going to select color range. And just like before, we've got a dropper tool, but rather than just click on a pixel, what I like to do is actually click and then drag an area over the representative color. The interior is looking better, but we're getting a little bit of color cast here on this panel, a little bit over here as well. And so let's see if we can address that using a similar technique, but this time we won't need to intersect anything. All we need to do is come down and get the color range tool, just select over a little panel there. Currently the color selection is far too broad, so we can come over to the refine slider here, and if I start bringing that back down, we keep going until we're dialed into the area we want. We've currently got the cloud selected here. That may or may not be of benefit. And now all we need to do is just take that magenta away by dropping the tint down. Equally, if we wanted to, we could come into the saturation slider, and I've aggressively pushed this all the way to -100 purely to demonstrate something. We've absolutely neutralized the areas that we've targeted, but now unfortunately it just kind of looks flat and lifeless. Unfortunately, there's this prevailing idea in architectural and real estate photo editing that you have to remove color casts, like completely destroy them. But as you can see here, if you take it to extremes and completely remove the color, things start to look pretty unnatural and very flat. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it in this video, but I just wanted to bring up the point that my take on it is we reduce the color cast to a point that it's acceptable, but we don't remove it. It's going to destroy believability if you get rid of it completely. So absolutely, if a cast is too strong, reduce it, but don't wipe it out completely. So I'm going to grab the saturation slider and just let it settle there, and I just want to see what I've actually done there with that tool. So this is our before. When I click the eye tool and release it, that's our after. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Using these same masking techniques, there are other areas that we could address, such as the bright orange wood in the background. We may want to dull that down. Also, the timber around the swimming pool is looking a little tepid and washed out in certain areas, so we could bring back more colour and vibrancy to that as well. But in the name of not letting this video go on forever, I'm not going to do that. I'll just do one more mask just to finish things off. So I'm going to just do one more gradient, and I'm going to bring it over the actual building itself and just do a little bit of final polish. So a nice big oval will do it, and now I can come in and just start making adjustments. So I just might boost that contrast a little more aggressively. Just bring those highlights down a smidge, perhaps even add a little more clarity, a little dehaze, and maybe even just brighten that section a little more. It's a great idea to know when to draw the line and call it done, but I'm going to add just one more mask because I've decided that the reflections in the pool are just screaming "look at me" a little too loudly. I want the viewer's eye to predominantly look at the architecture, not the reflection, and so I am just going to come in here with a new mask, and I'm going to talk into the luminance range, this bright area through here. Select that, and I'm just going to darken that down. I'm going to drop the exposure. I think I'm even going to bring the whites down for this as well. I don't want it to get too muddy though. I'm not concerned about what's going on in the building because I'm going to mask that out in a minute, but things are looking a little too yellow here. What I'd like to do is just kind of harmonize things with the blue of the actual water. So I'll take the temperature down into the blue section here, and now I'm actually just going to paint this in only where I want it. So all I need to do is intersect this mask that we've created at the moment that is influencing all of these other areas as well. If I press the O key, you can see exactly that. But what I'm going to do is intersect with a brush and then just lightly paint it over these highlights in the pool. So I'll come up here, click on the three dots, intersect with, and this time I'm going to select brush. I can have a pretty strong flow just so I can get this done relatively quickly. And now I can just paint that effect in only where I want it and press the O key to see our effect. We'll come over and see our before and our after, our before and after. And if we want to see the effect of all the masks we've created, we can just use the toggle turn off masks here, so we can see our initial global edit and then our edit with the more refined masking. So here was our original, got a lot of color cast going on here. Maybe the highlights aren't as controlled as well as we would like. And now I turn that on and we have a much more refined image. And so now it's time for my absolute favorite bit where we compare our original before and we look at our after, where we've got to. So let's do that now. So to see our original, I'm going to press the / key. This is where we came from, the absolute starting point of our merged HDR. And this is where we got to. Hopefully you guys will agree that that is a big improvement on where we started. Here's our before, here's our after. I really hope that's been useful for you guys and that you've learned something there. If you have, let me know in the comments, and at the very least, do me a favor, give me a thumbs up. I would say this image is about 95% of the way there for what I would like to do to deliver it to a client. There's a couple of things that I would actually like to retouch, such as the power lines and the little filter that we can see in the pool. And I also have a finishing process that I put all of my work through that just helps to elevate it just that little bit further. So I'm going to put a video together on that, finishing this image off. So if you'd like to watch that, it's not ready yet, but by the time you're watching this, it may be in the comments below. So the link will be there as soon as I've finished that. Otherwise, if you've subscribed to the channel, which you can do by clicking here, you should see that video pop up. And certainly pause the video, leave me any questions in the comments below. And if there's something you're confused about and you would like me to cover in a little more depth, I'll absolutely do that. It's my pleasure. I enjoy training, teaching you guys. So I hope you've got something of value out of this video. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.